everybody. Thanks for participating. It's great to be here with you guys. I am going to try to share my screen for a bit here, and then I believe you probably have access to this. If you don't, just please let me know, and I'm gonna just keep on going. In interest of time for the session here, so I'll be talking a little bit about cost of attendance. I will dis I'll discuss a little bit of the comparison between studying in Qatar and in the US. As you heard already, my university is located in Qatar, although we are an American institution, so there's a lot that we follow that are just like what would have been in the US. And then just to give you an idea too, I was actually an international student in the United States too, so I have gone through the application process, the visas, so I understand where you guys are at, but I will also prep by saying going through NextGenius, you actually have a great support network, which is something that I wish I had when I was actually going through the process myself. So in terms of the what I want to discuss today, I actually will talk very generally about what the cost of attendance is. I'll talk a little bit about usually where those funds are going to come from, and then I'll just give a couple of ideas of maybe how you can actually look forward to reducing a bit of that financial burden. And of course, love to answer some questions. In terms of what cost of attendance, so you hear us saying this quite a bit, and I actually pulled this from the Department of Education in the US. Basically, it's how much it's going to cost you to go to university. How much is it going to cost for you to go to school? And now this is the important part. When you go to our website, if you go to Northwestern's website, if you go to Lewis and Clark, if you go to any of the NextGenius website and you see what our cost of attendance is going to be, keep in mind, for the most part, we actually we disclose that information in terms of what an academic year is going to cost you. So how much is it going to cost you to go to school for 1 year? Of course, if you're going to get a bachelor's degree, you need to understand you're going to be going there for 4 years. So the cost of attendance obviously will every year will reset that little bit. And then also something that you hear me saying here on it's the cost of attendance usually includes 2 semesters. So it's an academic year, it's not a calendar year. So just keep that in mind. And what is included in a cost of attendance can actually vary a little bit. I mean, as you go through your particular journey through application, you're going to realize that universities, particularly in the United States, have a tendency to vary slightly from one another. So that goes from the admission aspect, that goes from the financial aid aspect, and it goes on from also what we actually count as a cost of attendance. Now, if you are going to go to the United States, you will essentially, unless you are a US resident, a permanent resident, or you are a US citizen, you're going to have to apply for a student visa to go to the US. And in that student visa, you're going to need a document issued by an institution that is called the I-20. And that institution is legally binded in the United States to verify that you actually can cover the cost of attendance before they issue that document to you. And when they do issue the document, you're going to go into your visa application and you will have a few other things. I'm not going to go into detail on that. As you continue to work with NextGenius, you will learn more and more later on about that particular process. But I do want to bring this up here because one of the things you're going to realize at that stage is that you will, between what your financial assistance from the institution, which will be coming up in the next slide, and what yourself will actually have to provide, you're going to have to showcase to that institution that you can cover a cost of attendance of at least 1 academic year. So what we normally consider as a cost of attendance, number one, the most obvious, the cost of tuition, how much it costs for you to actually take courses when you register for the institution. There will be some mandatory fees that every institution has a bit. That varies from health fees to a technology fee to a student activity fees. Every institution has a different one. But most of the time when you go to our website, you're going to see how much is your tuition. They usually will say tuition and fees because they will be included in that. Where they start varying a little bit is if you're taking a lab class, for example, or something along those lines, you might actually have a slightly difference on your tuition bill. And room and board, and that's also something that can vary a little bit. Room for sure, how much is going to cost for you to live on campus, and board just means your meals. Now, some institutions in the United States will have sort of a meal plan where you pay one fee per semester, and then you have 2 meals a day or 3 meals a day or something along those lines. And those meals can be provided on campus at a specific location. Some institutions, and this is where I would say it starts varying. For my institution in Qatar, our meals are basically pay as you go, so they're not necessarily included in that as a board and as a one-time fee where you pay to the institution. So I clumped those 3 in the beginning because that's usually where you're going to see on your bill coming from the institution, and where you will actually, again, see a bill coming in and you pay the institutions for those. But there are also cost of attendance of you going to an institution that are just basically for you to get to that institution and live there. What are some of the other things? Your books, your supplies, where you're going to have to get those obviously depends on the supplies that you have, and books and so on and so forth. This is an estimate, okay? When we come up with those costs, we're gonna give you an estimate of how much we believe your books will cost. It can be a little more, can be a little less. Transportation usually in the United States does not include your flight there. It includes usually something like how much it's gonna cost for you to just, need transportation within the US. And then this is where it becomes very vague. The personal expenses, usually, again, every institution will have their own way of thinking of how much does it cost for you to just live there outside of just being a student. And that there is no, particular amount where you must have for every single place. And this is also where it's going to vary quite a bit where you go to university. If you're going to go to university in New York City, your personal expenses will cost a lot more than if you're going to go to university in a rural area in the US, for example. So you can always ask the institution and the admission counselor what's included, and we will always try to give you an estimation on that. Now that I explained a little bit of that, and I'll tell you what is typically different from the US in here in Qatar. One of the biggest differences for us is our room is actually subsidized by the government. Well, so luckily for you guys, so our cost of housing is a little bit less. And we usually at Northwestern here, because we are not in the US, you don't have access to go into a bunch of different types of places to get your books. We include your books and supplies within your cost of going to university, and we get those books for you. And here, because we are internationally, we also include the cost of attendance, includes your plane ticket from home to Qatar. And then lastly, the biggest difference for us is we are not mandated by the government to verify funds before we can actually apply for your visa. So that's another situation that is a little bit different. Moving on a little bit of what's not included in here. This is an important one. Your summer tuition and your summer room and board. If you're going, like we assume that you're going to go back home during your largest break of the university, which is in the summer in the US. And if you decide you're going to stay and you want to take classes, you absolutely can, but you will not usually have that cost of attendance factor into the mixture, which also means for you as an ex-genius, your tuition scholarship most likely will also not cover that particular expense. So this could come out of your own money, your own funds that way. Your money to go out, your money to just have fun beyond. If you love to shop, you're gonna spend a lot more. Your parents will probably hate you for that, but that's on you. If you love to go out and you're gonna entertain yourself, we don't usually factor in a very lavish lifestyle on the personal expenses, so just keep that in mind, okay? So that's that. Where is the money coming from? Usually this sounds pretty obvious. Most of the time from the institution side, you're gonna have some sort of a scholarship, some sort of a grant. In Qatar, we also work with the government, and you have access to federal financial aid here in the state of Qatar. And I'm not going to go into details on that, but it is actually an opportunity so if a student says, look, I know I still need to cover my cost of living outside of tuition, I don't have that money, how can I get this? Instead of getting private loans back in India, you can actually get government help in Qatar, which they'll forgive you that. They forgive those loans if you stay and work in Qatar later on. So that's very specific to where we are. But in the United States, as unless again you are a U.S. citizen or you are a permanent resident, you will not have access to really applying for loans that are coming from the government or and then private loans in the U.S. would also require you to have someone who's from the U.S. for that. So a lot of that is going to come from your family's savings. We get asked this quite a bit, and I'll speak here from behalf of a lot of my colleagues in admissions, is how can I work on campus? You can work on campus, and I'll just switch to the next slide here about how you're going to maybe use that funds for reducing your burden, for example. You can work on campus, but there's going to be a couple things that you want to keep in mind. When you work on campus, you're subject to a cap of how many hours you can work because you are a full-time student. Being a full-time student means most of your hours are spent studying, are spent in the classroom, or spending preparing to go to the classroom. So those are going to be right there, the bulk of your time. So you will not have as much time to work outside of those hours. And so your visa, your US visa, dictates that you can work up to 20 hours a week while classes are in session and 40 hours a week while classes are not in session. So if you have a week-long holiday, you could technically work legally up to 40 hours a week if you have a job on campus, okay? Realistically speaking, working 20 hours a week and going to university is quite hard. And so I would actually advise most of you not to don't put your hopes on the idea that you're going to work and you're going to work as hard. I know you want to do it. We know you're willing to do it. But realistically speaking, your employment in the United States is going to be your pocket money. It's going to be your going out for ice cream with your friends. It's going to be, you know, putting some money away, and maybe, you know, when you have a break from school, you might actually travel to somebody's house, and that money can actually help you pay for the ticket there. It's not going to be really money that you can count on paying for your tuition, for any differences on that, or your living expenses, like your room and board. Those tend to be much more expensive than you really realistically will make money in the US for sure. And working off campus, unless you are working on an internship, you're not really allowed unless you, again, because of visa restrictions. In Qatar, it's similar in terms of the hours, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. The only difference, we don't pay taxes in Qatar, so that just makes it a little bit easier. But I still tell the students that you're not necessarily going to bank on making so much. And then lastly, what I wanted to say too is keep in mind the availability. The university has jobs on campus. They vary from, you know, working in a front office, working in the dining hall. So as long as you're willing to do anything, you probably will be fine, but don't bank on this at all, okay? And then one thing that I'll check before I pass on the mic here, a couple things that I wanted to touch base, which I also like to be wary of, you guys. One, off-campus housing. Living off campus may seem like something that is going to reduce your cost, but keep in mind where that's going to be may actually impact. And when you live off campus, you go from having all your expenses paid for in one bill to now having housing. You're going to have electricity, you might have water, you might have internet, you might have, so there, once you factor everything in, it may not be worth it. But if you are in a university that allows you to live on campus and you have maybe 2 or 3 friends and they already have a house, and that could actually potentially be something that you look into, provided it's not going to interfere with your education. And then most universities in the US allow you to actually register. So your cost of tuition is an X amount for, let's say, 15 credits or above. They might actually allow you to take one more class beyond that, and that class will not necessarily cost you anything extra per credit. So if it's a big if here, if it's not going to interfere with your education, you might actually be able to take maybe one extra class every semester starting from your 2nd or 3rd year. And that could, also a big if here, and it could potentially allow you to graduate maybe 6 months earlier. That alone would actually be a huge decrease in terms of costs for you. So that's also something to explore. Don't count on it, okay? You never know if you're gonna be okay with it. You never know, and you usually have to ask permission from the university to do this. But those are potential other ways where you could lighten your load a little bit. And that's that for me. happy to answer questions later on if you have, or keep track of my email over here. And if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you so much.